So my paper is titled Beeswax, an Ancient Material in Contemporary Art. I'm jumping. So, new materialism considers non-human creatures and all matter as existing in an interconnected and constantly fluid state of flux, flow, and change. It challenges conventional Western notions of nature as separate series of inert, stable entities to be exploited by superior humans. According to Diana Cole and Samantha Frost in Introducing the New Materialisms, this ontology sees one of its tasks as creating new concepts and images of nature that affirm nature's immanent vitality. My paper considers the essential role of honeybees as primary pollinators, integral to the world's complex ecosystems. Since ancient times, humans have been fascinated with honeybees, and today commercial beekeeping is industrialized on a massive, unsustainable scale, the implications of which inform my new materialist interpretation of the use of beeswax in the work of Wolfgang and also in my own practice. The embodied experiences of both conjure a sense of ritual, which reveals human potential to rethink and re-establish our interconnections with nature. There are over 20,000 species of bees in the world, found on every continent except Antarctica. Their presence on Earth has been traced back 80 million years, and bees are amongst the oldest species of living creature on this planet. About 25 million years ago, honeybees co-evolved with the flowering plants that they pollinate and feed from. Indeed, it can be argued that human senses have evolved in response to the honeybee. We're attracted to the same tastes, sights, smells, and unlike other interests, We're attracted to the same tastes, sights, and smells, unlike other insects such as blowflies. The same coloured flowers and their fragrances attract both humans and honeybees, and we have a similar sweet tooth, a taste for sugar and honey. We even share a similar gestation temperature. Human body temperature is 37 degrees, and worker bees, who are all female, maintain a constant 35 degrees in the brood section of the hive around their sister baby bees, eggs, and larvae. The earliest records of our human fascination with honeybees are found in rock art in Spain, India, Australia, and southern Africa, dating back to 8,000 years ago. The ancient Egyptians are credited with being the first culture to begin the tradition of keeping honeybees in man-made beehives about 30,000 years ago. They considered the honeybee to be sacred, and beekeeping was depicted in the hieroglyphs found in temples and tombs. Their coloured paint was made using a mixture of beeswax and natural pigments. Honey was highly valued, a luxury good used to pay taxes and in medicine due to its antibacterial properties, as well as in ceremonial offerings. Beeswax was also used in the embalming process to block the nose and mouth, and death masks were made using it. The sealing, preserving, and healing properties of beeswax and honey link them closely to death rituals and belief in rebirth and afterlife. Human reverence for honeybees has shifted over time, particularly over the last 150 years. Our relationship with honeybees is now more about manipulation and control through selective artificial breeding, intercontinental transportation, and industrial agricultural practices. Honeybees are essential to human existence, not because we enjoy the taste of their honey, but because their pollination services make them responsible for the success of over a third of the world's agricultural crops. Today, the vast majority of bees kept by humans are the domesticated European honeybee, a species originally from Italy, which is more easily managed, less aggressive, and less likely to swarm than other species. Since the ancient Egyptians, humans have continued to domesticate honeybees by building sheltered structures for their hives and taking rent in the form of honeycomb to extract honey and beeswax. As well as exploiting their pollination, and the rent includes using their pollination services on crops. The ancient Egyptians began the practice of moving domesticated honeybee hives to different locations to assist with pollinating their crops around the fertile floodlands of the Nile Delta. The idea that the honeybee agrees to this commercial transaction is problematic, but coming up with ways to better treat honeybees conflicts with our increasing demands placed on their pollination services. Since 2006, there's been a dramatic global decrease in domesticated honeybee populations. 40 to 60% of colonies are dying each year, Termed colony collapse disorder, this complex multi-causal phenomenon is reaching epidemic proportions in Europe, Central and Southern America, and China. The domesticated honeybee has an extremely weak immune system, particularly due to poor genetics from artificial inbreeding. So they struggle to cope with a constant combined onslaught of viruses and parasites such as the varroa mite, pesticides, malnutrition, and the stressful demands of migratory commercial beekeeping. Trucking hundreds of beehives thousands of kilometres across the land is a contemporary beekeeping response to the pollination needs of mass monocrops. Monocropping involves farming just one variety of plants in a singular mass. It's a very economical and efficient way of managing the growing, fertilising, harvesting and selling of agricultural produce. But it devastates entire ecosystems as it doesn't support any biodiversity. Honeybees need a range of flowering plants to feed from, and like humans, they are much healthier when they have a varied diet. Interestingly, this is one of the reasons why the much-touted new urban rooftop beehives are doing quite well, as cities have a variety of flowering plants and weeds. So honeybees can usually find a range and variety to feed from. However, areas with minimal human impact host the largest variety of flowering plants, and this suits honeybees the best. It is in such a wild, bee-haven natural landscape that the artist Wolfgang has his home and studio in southern Germany, and it is here that he collects the pollen and beeswax for his artworks. Cut into a hillside near his studio is his 2004 permanent installation, without place, without time, without body. It is a narrowing rectangular tomb-like shape lined with beeswax. There's a physical sense of enclosure in the space that gradually narrows towards the back, like a giant coffin. One has an immediate bodily response to this work, the soft, warm light reflecting off the beeswax walls and the tactility of the surfaces, the quietness of the space, compels one to slow down to a more contemplative state. The interior atmosphere of the installation reflects the origins of the beeswax in the hive. But that material, here in this site, is expanded and translated into man-made human dimensions. And that's inside. Sorry, I've missed one here. Okay. In the warmth of the hive, the youngest worker bees secrete small scales of wax from the underside of their abdomens, which are removed by their sisters to construct the comb chambers. These hexagonal capsules of the comb vary in size, with the largest being the brood chambers, the nursery, where the queen lays her eggs, which then grow into larvae and baby bees. And the other chambers are used to store honey and pollen. So the beehive is a shelter, pantry, and nursery. Honeybees spend over 90% of their lives in their dark, warm hives. The resonant materiality of the beeswax in Laib's tomb-like installations conveys these notions of shelter and preservation through embodied sensory experience, which echoes the ancient Egyptians' reverence for honeybees. Klaus Ottmann described Laib's work as spiritual materiality, an ongoing practice of renewed involvement in the question of being, transcendence, and the social by way of its materiality. For Laib, art is an act of participation and sharing, participating in nature and sharing that experience with others. This spiritual materiality is embedded in layers of history and mythology within the material of beeswax, which is brought to the surface by Laib's ritualistic process and his preference of working alone. Slowly investing his time and energy in complete attention to physically engaging with the present moment through a methodical interaction with his beeswax material, this mindfulness is his way of understanding and participating in the nature of existence, which in turn allows viewers to embody these interconnections. Laib has created a number of these beeswax-lined chambers, another outdoor one in a cave in the Pyrenees Mountains in Spain, which is what this image is of, and several other interior renditions in galleries and museums around the world. Katharina Schmidt describes them as having essential qualities of proximity, isolation, silence, and contemplation of interiority. Anyone who is drawn by these may perceive themselves differently once inside the protective cloak of these enclosures. The gaze glides closely and intimately over the shimmering wax. We become aware of its smell. The demands on our senses of hearing are lessened. Our skin is stimulated. They allude to presence and absence, and to various forms of existence. However, these chambers cleanse the symbolism of death of its terror. They are not threatening. The themes of spirituality and healing run throughout Leib's practice, which he links to his interest in Eastern philosophies and back to his early studies to be a doctor. He completed his degree in medicine, but never practiced, as he found the medical profession too narrow to satisfy his desire for a life's work that addressed not only the body, but also the spirit. Beeswax and honey are more than just symbolic of healing and sustenance. They are effectively medicinal for both bees and humans, and this is reflected in Leib's intention that his work contributes to healing the rift between humans and nature. His beeswax chambers open up a sense of time and space, which reflect the ancient relationship between humans and honeybees. The embodied experiences and conceptual intentions of these installations exemplify the ontology of new materialism. They offer the visitor a sensory engagement of reconnecting with nature. The extent to which the visitor is absorbed by the smell, touch, and look of the beeswax in these chamber spaces demonstrates our inextricable part in the flux and flow of matter. Leib says that the spiritual reality of the work is embedded in its materiality. The two cannot be separated. He has said, "I've always had this almost naive belief that these works contain a message that could change the world." Alan Artner agrees. He wrote that Leib's installations are more than a simple statement about ecology. They ask for more than repairing the environment. They demand that we do nothing less than change the attitudes governing our lives. This call to rethink how we use and abuse our natural environment, to shift our human-centric focus to consider that non-human things exist for their own ends and have not evolved for human use, is conveyed in Maruza Boschiardi's repurposing of the word materiality to mean a process rather than a thing in her 2014 book, Stuff Theory. The idea of working with the process of materiality, which is impermanent and unstable, rather than a static series of separate things, resonates in my practice. My practice is about reconciling myself with my surroundings and the world's inescapable natural cycles of life and death, destruction and renewal. Since the death of my father in 2009, most of my work has in some way related to grieving and reflecting on death as a natural, unavoidable part of life. In turn, my aim to cultivate an awareness of the vitality of everyday existence reflects a number of ecological issues and concern for the way that we all often feel inherently separated from nature. I respond to this by working with a contemplative process that focuses on embodying sensory experiences of surroundings, particularly the fragility and flux of time and materiality. My work for this new materialism exhibition is titled Divest. It consists of small empty beeswax funnels clustered around across the walls and smattered with ash, suggesting abandoned containers of life, hollow shells soon to disintegrate. And this is the work in the gallery at the moment, which you'll see tonight. Made by wrapping warm pieces, and this is a close-up of the work, sorry. Made by wrapping warm pieces of beeswax around my fingers and hands in a healing, bandaging gesture, the funnels are then pressed into the wall in barnacle-like clusters, clinging together at various angles. Impressions of my fingers remain on the wax surfaces, even as they become cold and brittle. Embedded in the work is a symbolism of the materials themselves. The beeswax speaks of the hive, the bees' honeycomb home, as a nurturing life force for the bees and their vital role in ecosystems. The ash is a symbol of grieving, ritual, and cremation. I've used beeswax in quite a few of my installations over the past 18 months. This is one that I did in Blue Mountains Cultural Centre with bark and panels of beeswax and a projection of melting beeswax. And this is the work I did at Hill End, which was a very interesting residency, as David alluded to just now. I was there during spring, and it's very cold there in winter, so I was fortunate to have some beautiful sunny days, and it was very interesting in the studio that I was working in to watch the way that the daylight changed, and so I worked with putting these panels of beeswax on the window and watching the shadows and silhouettes track across the floor. That's a photograph of the shadows on the floor. And then I reconfigured this work in my studio here a month or so ago. And this was a little bit more about playing with the shadows within the panels of beeswax, as well as how they projected the silhouettes onto the floor. Okay. So my use of beeswax has led me to research honeybees and beekeeping practices. And this led me to begin to question where I sourced my beeswax from, and realizing that finding the cheapest wasn't necessarily the most important factor. Another internet search led me to Tim Malfoy's natural beekeeping website. His hives are located in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales Central Tablelands. Tim practices apicentric beekeeping, which is about putting the health of the honeybee colony before its harvest, using Warray hives and sustainable methods of beekeeping, trying to keep honeybees as naturally as possible by mimicking the workings of a wild bee colony. The Warray hive allows honeybees to build their comb downwards as they would in the wild in a tree hollow by adding empty hive boxes at the bottom of the colony rather than at the top. So the brood is always protected and insulated from temperature fluctuations by a dense dome of honey and pollen directly above it. The hives are not opened frequently, as this stresses the honeybees, so these invasive inspections are limited to just twice a year, and honeycomb is only harvested intermittently in surplus honey flow seasons. In contrast to conventional beekeeping practice, old wax is not reintroduced to the hive after extracting honey from the honeycomb. This means that the bees produce less surplus honey, but allows them to draw their own wax and build their comb anew for each generation, and it reflects how the honeybees behave in the wild. It also minimizes invasive stress on the colony by not opening the hive repeatedly to move things around, and it allows them to naturally prevent disease and chemical buildup. The extracted wax comb, after it is crushed to release the honey, is then melted and set into beautiful golden kilo blocks, which look like gold bullion bars, and they're sold to the public. And this is what I've been using in my Divest installation. The ways that honeybees build and adjust their wax comb designs respond directly to the colony's changing needs, and it is integral to the communication and successful functioning of the superorganism that is the beehive. Each element, worker bees, forager bees, queen bee, larvae, baby bees, drones, wax comb, temperature, form and space, nectar, honey and pollen, are all interconnected and interdependent in the colony. The complex ecology of the world can be likened to the superorganism of a beehive, where humanity is like a few foraging honeybees that cannot survive alone, separated from nature outside the hive. My interest in the ways that we can understand an embodied engagement with time and nature through the sensory experience of art reflects new materialism's vitality, which takes a positive approach to the potential for change in human attitudes, proposing that we have the intelligence and creativity to re-engage with nature and all the complex interconnections in our world. Thank you.